Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to the Move Nourish podcast. Today we are going to be continuing with the sort of elemental metaphor for understanding digestion and understanding the pillars of good digestion that we began in the previous episode. So the last episode we talked about digestive fire and how what elements of good digestion the element of air represents. And so if you have not listened to that episode, go back and listen to that. This one will make a lot more sense because today we are going to be moving on to the other components that are maybe a little bit lesser known, although they're becoming more popular and we might be talking about them using different language, but you might actually recognize some of the pieces that we're talking about here. And this may, our hope and our prayer for you, dear listener, is that this is a way for you to organize your thinking around the sort of cardinal points of like earth, air, fire, water as an overall metaphor for building healthy digestion. So last time we talked about digestive vitality, which is like your cauldron, your furnace, the juices that you need to do the thing, and then the movement that you need to make sure the things are moving through when they need to and how they need to, and that everything is getting where it needs to go when it needs to get there. Today, we're going to be talking about the foundation of the house, if you will, right? So the actual brick and mortar, the structure of it, the tissue integrity, and then also the element of water and what the importance of moisture in digestion, in robust and healthy digestion.
I feel like last time we talked about the cauldron metaphor a little bit. Mm-hmm. The fire underneath the cauldron, making sure you're cooking that digestive soup enough, and then air as being how you need to stir the cauldron. Well, today we're talking about having enough water in the cauldron so you're not scorching anything and that you're making a soup that's
you gotta have some moisture in there.
Liquid enough. And we're talking about the cauldron itself, like maybe the seasoning on our cast iron cauldron, the structure
there
itself.
can't be any cracks in the pot. You won't want stuff leaking out. Yeah, you can't have the soup leaking onto the fire. Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. Wonderful. So it feels like water is a good entry point for that. I think in the metaphor of if we're making soup in a cauldron, right? If you don't put water in it, then you're just burning things in the bottom of it. You're just like burning things are dried out. So the element of water here, there's a very important, hydration is important for so many things, right? All the body processes, that's so mundane and like trite at this point, right? But one of those that it's really important for is digestion. You can give yourself constipation by not drinking enough water. And at its most basic level, right? Like you need to lubricate these tissues in order, and these processes, like stomach acid needs enough water to make it, like your bile can get dried out, right? You can have not enough water and hydration to make, what's happening in here is liquid, right? So there needs to be enough water in order to make that happen. And there also needs to be the slip and slide, right? There needs to be like the slip and slide of mucosa that serves several functions. Protective functions. If you don't have enough mucosa in your stomach, that's how you get ulcers, because your stomach acid is in direct contact with the muscular wall of the stomach, and that's not supposed to happen. So we're talking about having enough moisture, but then also this idea of mucosa. So let's give people just like a 30 seconds of what is mucosa and what is its role, like why, like what is this slip and slide metaphor on the inside of our digestive tract that is so fundamental and required in order for everything to be through when it needs to be?
In medicinal traditions, there was this idea of a little bit of yin and yang between fire and water. If you have not enough water element in the digestive system, then even the right amount of fire can burn you. And so there's this like kind of teeter-totter play with, even if our fire is low, if the water's extra low, we can still
dynamic
not have
tension
enough.
if you will.
Yes. But the mucosa, and it, in addition to performing a protective area, mucosa is slimy. If you think about the juice of okra, it's snotty in a way. And so that also allows for three big functions. A, it is protecting against our own digestive fire. B, it,
as an example of ulcers and stomach acid.
Yes. Yeah. B is it is slowing down. You just had balloons. Is that what happens when I do this?
I know. I think that's this. I don't know.
Whoa. Wow. Okay.
No, it was a peace sign. Anyway, distracted.
Sign?
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Protective.
Yeah. So the mucosa, in that slimy sense, allows things to slow down as it's moving through the gut. So that means that our the nutrients that are being acted upon by our fire element, that are being digested by the stomach acid, by the
enzymes,
emulsified
and
by bile, by enzymes, they are moving, instead of moving through water and the enzymes have to catch them, they're moving through snot. And so they, as they get closer to the lining of the intestines, they're like, oh, okay. And then it's easier for the enzymes to act upon them. Thirdly, the immune system is able to act on stuff that's not supposed to be there. Through that same slowing down. It slows down nutrient foods that the enzymes can break down.
It's a checkpoint.
But then it also slows down any critters or toxins or things that don't need to be there, and the immune system's able to take care of things. So that's
it helps with it's like, you know what it makes me think of is the customs line at an airport, you know, where they make you like walk back and forth.
I think
that's a very good way of explaining it.
You can think of some of the other areas that we have mucosa where it's primarily for protection. It's to slow down in your nose and your sinuses. It's there to just slow down critters. In our gut, it's more multifaceted because it's also helping the digestive process.
Yes. Yeah. So hopefully that makes the case for you, dear listener, of this is a vital, important part of the digestive process. We don't often think about it, but if you think about just like mucosa in general and like how prevalent and how like ubiquitous snot of one species or another is in the body, right?
Yes.
Like top, bottom, like the whole system, that idea of goop, if you will, for lack of a better term, and wetness serves many important functions in multiple body systems, but today, like the digestive system. So,
last little tidbit is we'll be talking about very soon the importance of gut bacteria. And so the mucosa is also crucial to provide the right habitat in the intestines for our good bacteria to live. So, sorry.
Yes. No, absolutely. No, that's okay. So I know in our last episode we did it a little bit differently, but I think today it makes a little bit more sense to me to jump into talking about demulcents right away, and then we can switch to talking, and then we'll talk about herbs, because we just have one category of herbs and there's less overlap than there was last time. So when this goes awry, when we are dried out, when for whatever reason we are not making enough mucosa, or it's not getting where it needs to be, and we don't have enough what have you, or tissues are inflamed and so they're burning through it, or like they need more, they need to be coated and soothed at a higher rate, and so there's a higher demand for it. There's one big category of herbs that we can divide into a couple of subcategories that really helps very specifically address and coat and soothe and nourish the mucosal tissue, and that category is called demulcents. And so Forrest gave the example of okra. And just to circle back to foods are medicine as well, of course, right? We know this. And an example of a demulcent food would be okra. Another one that people know would be oatmeal, right? Goopy. Think about the goopiness of oatmeal
like
when you
chia seeds.
Yes, chia seed pudding. So that polysaccharide-rich goop is medicinal in the sense of it is helping to almost replace or bolster your body's natural amount of mucosa. So it basically chemically looks a little bit similar, and so it can kind of give you a little bit of extra support in that department if there's somewhere where you're not getting enough demulcent or mucosal activity. And then there are also herbs, of course. There's subcategories. That's where we'll get into the subcategories of herbs, but know that there are foods that are demulcent, like okra, like oatmeal. What's another one? I know there's more.
Nopales,
chia, yep, the nopales cactus, So the like the sliminess of it, the goopiness of it. Aloe vera, although we wouldn't really eat that as a food, but
there's also I think you might know the name. I'm not very good with Arabic, but it's a jute mallow that's used as a slimy stew in Lebanese cuisine.
I don't remember. We've talked about this before, and I've since forgotten the name. Malabar spinach is also another one that comes to mind. That's really goopy.
Yeah, that's a slimy one. I don't know what
that's
culture.
A slimy one.
That's from like New Zealand, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure where Malabar spinach is. I've grown it, but I've not. Yeah.
This category we're starting to describe in foods is what in herbal medicine we'd call typical demulcents. They're slimy in texture.
Yeah. Okay. They're goopy,
They're goopy. They have you cook them or prepare them, and they have that viscous slime, and we know, that's a demulcent because it's got
right. And so there are herbal examples of those typical demulcent, like marshmallow root, slippery elm.
slippery elm, though slippery elm is one I don't use very much because it's
we gotta be. It's over harvested.
Sustainability thing. There's also a Siberian elm that is a lot more sustainable that folks listening from like New Mexico, Colorado, and West can probably find. I think it's pretty popular there, common there. With marshmallow, in addition to the root, the leaves are demulcent, and while marshmallow is famous for having its big slimy roots, all of the mallow family have slimy leaves, and so
okra's also in the mallow family, so that makes sense.
Okra's also there too. Yeah, but you can get like the Turk's cap mallow, the hibiscus leaves.
Hibiscus,
all of those have a.
That's also in the mallow family. Yep.
There's lots of fun slimy plants you can find. Another one in the south is sassafras leaf.
Oh yeah.
Is a nice slime.
Yeah. And then in addition to the typical demulcents, we also have atypical demulcents, or non-typical atypical demulcents, like sweet demulcents. The one that comes to my mind immediately, of course, is licorice. Licorice root. True licorice root, dear listeners. Many of you who don't like the flavor of licorice have probably only ever had licorice candies, which are often made with anise. So I would caution you to not write it off too soon, because the flavor of true licorice is actually quite delightful. But that one's not goopy, but it's what Jim McDonald would call a sweet demulcent. Yeah.
Yes, it has that same moisture-giving quality. And you look at how licorice was used historically. It's used clinically in ulcers and things like that, but also used more run-of-the-mill when you're feeling like your digestion is a little bit irritated and maybe
after you've thrown up
out.
Maybe I think about that, like raw feeling. And so interestingly enough, just a sort of organoleptic or like a sensory piece that may connect with you, dear listeners, if you have had real licorice, you may notice, like in a throat coat tea or in some of the teas that have licorice root or licorice root extract in them, you'll drink the tea, and then everything that you eat for the next couple of hours tastes like licorice.
Yes.
That's because the licorice is coating your tongue. Your tongue is your mouth is a mucous membrane. And so the licorice is doing its job. It's coating your tongue in order to provide like a temporary balm, like a salve for the inside of your body. And that's licorice doing its job. So you may have experienced that, and that is you experiencing the medicinal effect of a demulcent, of an atypical demulcent.
Oh, back to typical demulcents. I think we should say aloe vera.
Oh.
Because...
Oh, yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but I didn't mention it in detail, Is
a great...
Yeah, but that's one, again, that's very easily for people to...
it's slimy,
grasp,
it's
for
juicy.
sure. Goopy,
atypical demulcents.
Okay, back in atypical demulcents, what about licorice? Or what besides licorice, sorry.
Besides licorice, that's where... Herbally, we have a lot of atypical kind of starchy roots. Things like Cotinopsis, like
burdock.
Shatavari, burdock, Chinese yam. They provide that moisture, even though they don't have that slimy scent in the same way we'd normally think of. Yep. I wonder, this is going off historically...
Off book?
Sourced. Off book, yeah. I find that sweet potatoes, some of our starchy vegetables, on a smaller note, can give a little bit of a moistening effect. And so maybe they're a type of atypical demulcent. But for the most part, I think licorice is one of our best examples.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so that is water, right? Mucosal integrity, or supporting the mucosa, and this element of both facilitating and then also slowing down through the system so that the immune system and the digestive system have time to do their magic. And so the importance of coating and soothing these mucosa, especially in particular circumstances.
Fat would be the other.
Oh, yeah. So nutritionally, fat would be the other sort of...
Coating, because we think about water and mucus in this sense, but we also have the fat of the bilipid layers in the mucosa that's also part of this. And some of our atypical demulcents, like burdock and Solomon seal, have a little bit of an oily quality, but we can also think there about the place that eating olives and eating good fats in our meals and things still has that net moistening effect and can help the mucosa as well a lot.
Yeah, well, because moisture is oil and water, right? There's oil. If you think about the acid mantle of the skin, right? Like moisture is, when we say moisture herbally, what herbalists mean is they mean there's oil moisture and there's water moisture. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about our final element, which we have talked about fire, we've talked about air, we've talked about water, and we are talking now about earth. And what the metaphor of earth does when thinking through healthy digestion. Earth represents tissue integrity. The literal ground underneath your feet. The building blocks and the foundation, like the walls and the roof of the structure of your actual digestive system, which are built of tissues, just like a brick house. So let's talk a little bit about what can go wrong with that, what role that plays. And we're obviously going to just touch very lightly on like leaky gut and what happens when the tissue integrity is compromised.
Yeah, so I think that's the beautiful thing in the gut is like how it demonstrates the dynamicism of integrity, how it is the container.
Right. It's not just about locking everything out or letting everything in.
It's not just about locking everything out, it's also about letting everything in. And so it provides integrity through that dynamic of weighing those things out. If you had an earth element in your gut like a stone and just weren't letting anything in, then that's malabsorption and we die. But if we lose a lot of our integrity and become too permeable and we start letting things in that are not fully digested or things in that we didn't want to let in the first place, then we can start having reactions to it. And that's where, I guess, just to touch lightly on the leaky gut syndrome or increased intestinal permeability, we won't cover that in depth, but it's the idea that our intestines have to decide what gets let in and out. And when that integrity is loosened to a great degree to where things are just hanging out,
too much is escaping.
Too much is coming in. Then we have foods that are coming in before the digestive fire has been able to fully break them down. We have things that the mucosa would normally have just shut it on down to be eliminated. All of these little things that normally would not have been let in are moving through the mucosa into the galt, which is the lymphoid tissue
itself.
Into the body itself. And when it gets in there, the immune system reacts to it and says, "Whoa, what's going on here?"
This isn't supposed to be here. And it can be a benign thing, dear listeners. I think that's important. It's not going to be like a pathogen necessarily, and in most cases it's not. It's like this food that's not all the way digested or just slightly higher percentage of it than is supposed to be escaping. Because it's not entirely airtight, it's not supposed to be. But a higher percentage of it starts escaping, and then we run into all of these issues.
And then, but to be clear, this happens all the time. It's normal that sometimes things that aren't supposed to get in. And the immune system has a lot of mechanisms for dealing with that. When it happens in a major sense, that's when we get sick. But still, the immune system has a mechanism for doing it. What we see in this, again, to be covered later, leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability syndrome, is when this happens chronically, and then the immune system loses its ability to navigate that. And we either have it's not responding enough, or it starts responding to things that we don't want it responding to. We end up with a lot of food sensitivities. We end up with autoimmune reactions, and there's a whole place that can go. But today, we're just talking about what's the basis of keeping that healthy. What keeps those tissues healthy and highly functioning? And the first thing that we'd say is all the other elements. I think that earth is dependent on, we have strong digestive fire so that there's not too many of these poorly digested foods just sitting around. We're wanting to have good air through motility so that things are moving through at a timely manner. They're not moving through too fast.
They're supposed to.
Yeah. And then we need good mucosa, a mucus layer that's basically, if here's our earth layer, our water layer of mucus is sitting right on top of it, and it's its protective layer. And so it's ground zero for any protection.
The buffer.
Yes. So first step to helping earth is help the other elements. Earth is also a place that our next episode with gut bacteria is going to be really important because, like the soil of the ground...
I mean, not our next one, but an upcoming episode.
In the upcoming, yeah, sorry. Like the soil of the ground, our earth element in our gut is not devoid of microbial things. And so microbial health is very important for mucosal health as well. But there are some things we can talk about right now for helping the integrity
that tissue
of
integrity,
the
yes.
tissue.
But let's start herbally. And so the category of herbs, dear listeners, whose job it is to stimulate, because in many cases, when you start to lose this tissue integrity, it can be a nutrient question, right? You don't have the nutrients that you need to build it. Or it can be a question of inadequate blood and lymph flow chronically over time, that's a separate conversation of like chronic hypercortisolemia and stress and shunting blood flow away from your digestive organs for too much of the time, so it can go to the major muscle groups so that you can run from the bear. And so when you're constantly stressed, over time that adds up. So without getting too deep in the weeds, even though I just did, sorry, there is a category of herbs called vulneraries that are basically wound healing herbs that we can use from the inside out. So when they are when they come in contact with those tissues, they stimulate blood and lymphatic flow and tissue proliferation.
Yes.
One example that you may have come across that's quite popular is plantain. Plantain is a tissue vulnerary that is going to, it also is I would say it's a little bit demulcent as well, depending on the preparation, especially fresh. And it's going to stimulate blood and lymph flow. It's also going to stimulate cellular tissue proliferation very mildly. There are stronger ones, but I think Forrest and I are, in terms of like ones that are going to stimulate cellular proliferation much faster, but I think Forrest and I are both in the camp of we don't use comfrey internally, period. End of story. Sorry. There are differing schools of thought within herbalism on that, but that's where I land. So they're going to stimulate new cell growth, basically, to help you rebuild. So they're going to help you hire some builders that are going to come in and put bricks back in the wall.
What's fun is you can think of, if you're familiar with herbal salves, a lot of the same herbs that we're using to help put in the
wound
wall
herbs.
when we have a scrape or a wound, we're using internally. I've had clients, they're like, what's going on here? The salve jar and my gut healing tea have the same things in them. Are you just using the same thing for everything? I'm like, no, it's just... yeah, so
yes,
in addition to plantain, workhorses that I use are calendula, as well as another little cute flower, chamomile, which is a cool one. We think of it more as a nervine tea that, helps with the nerves, helps with upset digestion, but it actually has a lot of vulnerary abilities as well. And then I also love woundwort is what I'm thinking of, but there's a better common name, which is...
Self-heal?
Not self-heal, yeah. That's the more commonly used word for it. Yes, self-heal is a great one as well. Yeah. Any others that you like?
Yeah, that one's great. Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's pretty much covers my big ones, right? Calendula is my ride or die. So
mine too.
She has never let me down, and I just love her. And there's also something I think about that, like resinous quality of her. I just love calendula. And then in addition to the herbal so tissue integrity, right, can be supported through herbal vulneraries, and that's where you're starting to see like gut healing teas and things like that, and that's a significant component of your gut healing teas.
I guess the other one is trifla, which is actually three herbs.
Oh yeah.
But
trifla is an Ayurvedic formulation.
Formulation. It's famous for that it is tropho restorative in gut stuff because you can give it in diarrhea and in constipation and it figures out how to help both. But it actually has tissue proliferation effects on the gut wall, so it would fit into this category as well.
Yeah. Okay. But in addition to herbs, we can also use other things to help support tissue integrity. And these might be, dear listener, the things that might ring a bell because they're becoming quite popular, and they have become quite popular as health supplements. For example,
collagen.
Yeah.
So we utilize collagen for the formation of connective tissue, which is one of the main tissues in the lining. So in the mucosal, in the gut lining we're talking about, we have a web of collagen connective tissue with little enterocytes that are populated through it. And so collagen is made out of amino acids that are considered non-essential because we can make them in the body using other amino acids. So theoretically, we don't need to eat collagen food sources because we can make it ourselves. In reality, those processes may be a lot faster and slower in different people, under different stress loads. There's questions as to what that looks like. Historically, if we look at the ratio of eating collagen-rich meaty cuts versus pure muscle tissue cuts, was a lot more balanced than it is today. So now we get a lot more methionine-rich steaks, ground beef, things like that, and we're not getting as much glycine, proline, all these amino acids that form collagen as we used to. And so supplementing with it is getting unpopular for a variety of reasons, in structural health, but also in gut health. It will help with forming that strong gut integrity. So in addition to collagen supplements themselves, which you can buy everywhere now, eating odd cuts of meat that have more collagen, bone broth as the OG collagen supplement, and even using gelatin, which what we call collagen in a supplement is just a hydrolyzed collagen, which means that if it won't gel up into Jell-O if you put it in the refrigerator, but if you're drinking it hot, you can do the same thing with a good quality gelatin as with the collagen supplement.
And that's the one that you probably have heard of, dear listeners, because that's the one that is lauded, and for good reason. But again, like Forrest was mentioning, there are ways around buying $40 worth of collagen supplements, and there's perfectly valid and probably more bioavailable ways to get to the same conclusion that are more bioavailable, more cost-effective, more sustainable.
Yeah, but for folks that don't have the time for that, do the collagen. It is good. It is good stuff. It is important.
And then lastly, Forrest, you were blowing my mind before we started recording just now, talking about, because I knew the first part of this. But I did not know the second part of it. So the last one, if you are like me, if you are an umami mommy, if you love umami, I have very good news for you. Well, rather, Forrest has very good news for you, because I'm going to let him take the lead on this one as well, because I think his understanding of it is a little bit more than mine at this point. But my understanding, I feel like maybe where more people are at, and then we can build on that. My understanding of umami is that the chemical responsible for the flavor that we know of as umami is glutamate or glutamates. And so those foods that are naturally glutamate-rich foods, vine-ripened tomatoes, like steak, like soy sauce, like anything fermented, really, like cheeses, like sardines, like these meaty, that like savory, meaty flavor that we have come to know as umami. I understood the chemical responsible for that based on the research, the Japanese research that is the original research on it, is glutamates are responsible for that flavor. And you were saying that it's not just the glutamates, it's also, take it away. Tell me what you were...
Glutamates, and it's free glutamates. That's why like an aged steak or Spanish ham is different than just any meat, because all meats will have a large amount of glutamate amino acids in them, but it's bound to other amino acids. And this is another place where theoretically we don't have to have free glutamates for feeding the gut, because our gut bacteria break down the proteins, or in our own bodies we break down the proteins and get the glutamine out and then give it to wherever it's needed. So we don't have to have free glutamate, we get it bound. The place that it gets complicated is our enterocytes, that's the cells of our gut lining. They are highly dependent on large amounts of glutamate, and they cannot get enough from our own body. We can't supply them through blood flow with enough glutamate. So the gut bacteria have to provide them with that free glutamate by basically breaking it down in the lower intestines and sending it back up. Now, that's dependent on having really healthy gut bacteria. And in talking about this, we may not have that. We may be working on that. So our umami-rich herbs provide free form glutamine or glutamate in food form, which can help to nourish those enterocytes. And so basically the fermentation, the aging processes release that. Now, the interesting part is the real strong umami flavor doesn't come from glutamate alone. It comes from the combination of glutamate with inosate or inosine. It actually comes with a combination of glutamate with either inosine or another breakdown of a nucleotide. So gualinate, I think is how you say it, is broken down from mushrooms and comes down from meat sources, and then there's one that I can't remember right now that comes from shellfish. But either of those three that are basically broken down DNA in a way. They're broken down nucleotides. When tasted in combination with free glutamine or glutamate, give the strongest umami flavor. And we see that in combinations. So, for instance, when you take bony beef, and boil it with mirepoix, so onions, celery, and carrots, you're getting the perfect mixture from those two sources of inosine and glutamate, free glutamate, to make it umami. And that's why when you boil a stew in that way with the mirepoix, you get that, it's so rich and good. You get the same thing in Chinese congee when you mix chicken with both ginger and green onions. In Japanese cooking, you get it when you mix the dashi, the little dried fish, with seaweeds. And so those combinations together is what do it. And then we have other things like soy sauce that have both already in them in the process of fermenting soy. And the cool thing is that we're now getting new research showing that inosine has a lot of beneficial properties for the enterocytes as well. It seems to help to balance the immune system. It's being studied right now, especially for combating enterocyte death during chemotherapy. So there's bustling research on that inosine probably feeds these enterocytes as well as glutamine that we already knew it fed the enterocytes. So in the end, we get to this thing of umami foods. The more umami we have, we are actually giving some nourishment to our enterocytes, which is really exciting.
The tissue integrity of our enterocytes, which the enterocytes again are the building block cells of the digestive system. Oh my god, mind blowing. I love it. Again, I am like an umami fiend, and I feel like a lot of people are. That's a big part of what I feel like tastes good. And so there's this it's interesting because that there's like this evolutionary impetus for those foods and us gravitating towards those foods that are rich in umami because they would have helped the tissue integrity. We would maintain or reestablish our tissue integrity.
A lot of umami foods also, many of them have butyric acid, which is an organic acid that is another food for the enterocytes that the gut bacteria make. Typically, in a healthy sense, they're making a ton. So,
like 10 to 15% of your energy expenditure is provided by the butyric acid made in your guts, right? Yeah. And amazing.
So many of the foods we're talking about, like Parmesan cheese and
anchovies
anchovies, that have a little bit of that extra butyric acid as well. So we can think of it when we're enjoying those luxurious foods that we're also
feeding my enterocytes. Yeah, amazing. Okay, dear listeners, there you have it. A very rich and robust elemental metaphor for understanding what makes robust, good, optimal, functional digestion. Fire, digestive fire. Your stomach acid, your bile secretion, your pancreatic enzyme secretion. Air, motility, the movement, the flow of things through the system at the correct pace and at the correct times, and the coordination of the muscular contractions. Water, mucosal, like the element of and the role that mucosa play in the digestive system in facilitating digestion and facilitating immune monitoring in the gut, and just hydration and protection of those tissues from the other tissues, as in the case of the stomach. And then finally, earth, the integrity and the structure and what houses all of those mechanisms and all of that hardware, if you will, and all of those processes. And again, this is a metaphor for understanding this is not necessarily like literally attaching them to a specific physiological process, although in some cases we can do that. This is a way for you to access and understand and structure your thinking around, okay, what do I feel like I'm missing? Do I have enough fire? Do I have enough air? Is there something going on with my water element of this? Do I need to think about my tissue integrity? So that is our intention for you, is to use this as a way to think about where you can bolster and where your digestion can use some extra support, because as we mentioned at the beginning of the last episode, the only system more important than your digestive system in terms of your foundational health is arguably your nervous system, right? So those two are the major players in this game of foundational health. So if we, like we were saying, our clinical work focuses on digestion and nervous system, like 60%, 70%, sometimes more than that of our clinical work centers around what's going on with digestion, what can we do to support digestion, what's going on with the nervous system, what does it need, what can we do to support it. Not saying that that's everything, of course it's not, but that's what your average person walking around on the street could do in order to vastly improve their health. Yeah. Beautiful. All right, dear listeners, we will be returning to some of our Understanding Stress episodes in the coming times, but also stay tuned for our take on some of our microbiome and our microorganism pieces, because we have thoughts, as you might imagine, because we have thoughts about all the things. And like I mentioned, drop us a comment either on social or wherever you are listening to this podcast, whether it's Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, wherever, and let us know what your thoughts are, what your questions you have, what you would like to see more of, and we will do our best to incorporate that into future episodes. This has been the Move Nourish podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Alyssa.
And I'm Forrest.
And we will catch you next time.